An exhibition of Winifred Nicholson's paintings opens at the Tate Gallery in London on June the 3rd, and then goes on tour to Newcastle-upon-Tyne, Bristol, Stoke-on-Trent, Aberdeen and Cambridge.
The story of the artist Winifred Nicholson, who died in 1981, as told to Judith Collins by Winifred's brother, Wilfred Roberts, her two sons, Jake and Andrew Nicholson, Amy Little and Emmy Davidson, who worked for Winifred, friend and neighbour Helen Bagan, the poet Kathleen Raine, and fellow artists Valerie Thornton, Michael Chase, Andy Christian and Donald Wilkinson. Winifred at Home was produced by Judith Bumpus.
But now it's 10:15 and time for the Saturday feature.
One very stormy day, I was out there chopping wood, and I looked at the house and I saw a candle burning in a window. And I thought to myself, there's a marvellous painting being made in that little room. And sure enough, at the end of the day, Winifred had produced an absolutely magic painting with a candle set in this very deep window with a sort of dark ultramarine sky outside. This wonderful glow.
Winifred at Home. The story of Winifred Nicholson as told to Judith Collins by friends and family.
Well, we're now in the front kitchen of the original farmhouse, which Mother and Ben bought and made into their home. It was an old Cumbrian farmhouse. The walls are made out of large numbers of Roman wall stones, which were pinched from the wall, like most of the houses round about, and with stone flag floors, which we've kept. The council have asked us to take them out. They say it's not modern enough, but we've kept them. Should we go upstairs to what was Winifred's bedroom and studio? This is the room where she probably painted most of the pictures. She had her bed over in that corner, and her workspace was round by the windows here. She didn't use an easel, but propped her picture up on the back of a chair, and then she had a table where she spread out her palette and paints and so on. As you can see, there's a window looking south, smallish window. You could see the view of the fells and out over the garden. And then a largish window to the right, looking out over the farm and the Lake District far away. And then looking out over the valley, to the other side you can see the foothills of the Pennines, Coldfell and Tyndallfell. The view comes into most of the pictures. It's awfully difficult to keep it out.
What was life like when your mother lived here at Bankshead?
Primitive. But it was always a happy house to come to. When Mother was painting, there was fairly well dead quiet because she liked to be able to concentrate and didn't like to be interrupted. It was a working atmosphere, in other words.
Oh, it was nice. It was a happy house.
When the other girls had their days off, what did you actually do for them?
Well, no, I scrubbed the passage.
Did you?
It was a hard-working house,
Yes.
but I liked housework, so it didn't worry me.
Did you ever see her paint?
Well, she painted me, you know.
Tell me about that.
Mrs. Nicholson stood with her back to the grate. The table was in the middle, you know, covered with beautiful flowers. Mrs. Nicholson loved flowers, you know. And I sat and I suppose I was sewing. And she was terribly, terribly pleased with it. But to me, my hair was absolutely brilliant red. Oh, gosh.
It was too bright, was it?
Well, I hardly knew myself, but everybody else said how nice it was.
And what was Ben Nicholson like?
Oh, nice. He really was. Very arty. And
Wore a
always
beret.
very smartly dressed he was, and he always wore a tie. And behind the studio door, there was his string, and all his lovely coloured ties, spotted ties, blue ties, red ties, and there they were. Oh, yes, I really liked him. He was fun.
By all accounts, Winifred didn't dress as smartly as Ben. What did she look like?
Ah, unique. There's a story of her going to a rather fashionable family wedding, wearing a hat that she'd decorated with milk bottle tops, which she'd shaped into whatever sort of decorations you do shape milk bottle tops into. I didn't see that particular hat, but on the beaches she used to pick up limpet shells that had holes in them and sew them onto velvet bands, and she wore necklaces made of things like limpet shells, which she'd made, which went marvellously with the crottle-dyed tweeds, and she wore them with a sort of twinkle in her eye, you know. She rather delighted in not shocking us, but I think she had a great affinity with the Bronze Age. She loved things like Skara Brae or Brodgar Circle in the Orkneys. She liked painting stone circles. And I think she rather saw herself as a Stone Age woman who would have been making her own clothes. But at the same time, she carried it off, you know, with complete style and conviction.
Her clothes weren't important to her. Other things were more important than clothes.
What was important to her?
Well, her way of life. You know, she was a Christian Scientist, and a very lovely one. And I think that was one of her first loves. Then her family and her paintings, and she had her 3 children. They were young during the war. And she still kept on painting, and she used to keep goats. She was interested in everything and everybody. She lived a life of love, and it shone from her face.
She was a very good mother to us. Because she was separated from her husband, she had to fulfill the fatherly qualities to a large extent, as well as the motherly ones, and she always cared for us. We never had a sense that we were neglected or left out because of her painting, although I am conscious that she did escape to paint. Well, it was when her marriage with Ben split up, and she felt she was free, even though she had 3 young children. And the most exciting place that painting was happening in was Paris. And so she upped and took everything to Paris and proceeded to get to know the painters there.
She talks of a star galaxy of her time in Paris. Do you think she means these are the other artists she met, or that was the atmosphere in Paris?
Oh, she also speaks of it buzzing like a cork. It was the atmosphere in Paris, but it was also the other people and the immensely interesting work that was going on at that time in all fields, music and dance, as well as painting.
And how big was your flat? It was at the Quai d'Auteuil, wasn't it?
Yes, it was on the right bank. It was really too expensive for us, but it had a wonderful view over the Seine, and at night you would get the lights of the barges going up and down the Seine reflected on the ceiling and coming into the room.
When war threatened, Winifred packed up the Paris flat and went to live in Surrey in autumn 1938. But before long she found herself drawn back to Cumbria. Why was that?
Her family roots were in Cumbria, though her grandfather was the 9th Earl of Carlisle, who was also a painter, a great friend of the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, and was the first person to interest her in painting when she was young. And she often stayed with them at Narworth Castle, which was nearby. She loved the romantic side of things.
Was she a romantic person?
Well, she always felt her roots were in Cumbria, and she described them as being related to the harebells in the fields and walls and the wildness of the fells. She liked wild things.
Some people have rather assumed that she painted only wildflowers, but this is not true at all. She painted garden flowers too, and was a very involved gardener. She loved her garden and took great pride and care in what she planted there. She liked the kind of flowers that country people grew in country gardens, you know. phlox and anemones and what kind of flowers were there? Jacob's ladder, several kinds of wild crane's bill naturalized in the garden. And she liked to plant her daffodils wild rather than in flower beds. So that there was a lovely overlap, really, between the wild flowers and the garden flowers.
I remember doing some gardening for her, and she said to me, "Will you help me tidy up the garden today?" So I went and got the spades and the things, and began what I thought tidying up. And and wouldn't I go to a lovely clump of flowers that was called Star of Bethlehem. It was a lovely white flower, and she loved to paint it, and it was beautiful, and began cutting it away. And when she came back, she looked so sad. She said, "Emmy, don't you know that's the Star of Bethlehem?"
She wasn't too cross.
I never saw her cross once, ever.
I expect you've seen a little book she published called Flower Tales, which are a bit like Hans Andersen's stories in, I think, The Snow Queen, which the flowers tell their story. She didn't at all mean the kind of realistic painting that every picture tells a story suggests. Quite the contrary. They were flowers seen with the eye of imagination. The botanical structure of flowers didn't particularly concern her, although she had a wonderful gift of communicating the structure of a flower with a few brush marks. She never was wrong about it. You see, Winifred was very much concerned with colour as light. She was always, in a sense, painting light rather than painting objects. Flowers were a kind of occasion for painting light.
I can remember once she said that she was in Cumbria, and it was a very dark day, and she wanted to bring a lamp into the room, really. So she went out into the garden to pick a bunch of flowers, and she picked all the yellow flowers that she could find. The yellow Iceland poppies, yellow iris, sunflowers, and so on. It still wasn't yellow enough, so she went out again and picked more buttercups and dandelions and so on, and it still wasn't yellow enough. And then she went out again and found an everlasting sweet pea of a magenta, bright magenta colour, and just one of those in the bunch of yellows made the whole thing glow.
Border Television recorded a rare interview with Winifred Nicholson when she was in her mid-80s, and in it she gives a very practical account of the way she worked.
You wait till you've got a very good idea, very clearly in your own mind. Generally it's something like a lemon yellow and an orange, or a cerise and a vermilion, or a blue-grey and a brown-grey, something like that. Two things, two relationships probably. You go around and find something that will connect itself up to in the visual world. Then you take a canvas, you squeeze out your paints and you paint, and you don't stop again. Colours make me want to paint, also makes me want to jump for joy or anything else that I might do.
And that was exactly how Winifred felt when she saw a rainbow, because a rainbow was full of all the colours in her paint tubes.
And in addition to that, she always felt that she could see a colour that was beyond the rainbow that other people couldn't see. And we don't know whether this is really true, because she couldn't describe it very well in paint, because the paints don't exist. But she reckoned there was a sort of peachy colour that was beyond ultraviolet that she could see.
Did studying the colours in and beyond the rainbow have any spiritual meaning for her?
Of course, there's the joy of Noah's rainbow promise. And I think she did see that promise in the rainbow. It was a mind to explore, but not in a particular symbolic sense. And she turned away from symbolic pictures.
But in a strange way, the rainbow was a symbol to her all her life. She went to places on the earth where she could find it. It happens a lot in Cumberland and on the Hebrides.
Yes, it certainly does. But I think this was a factor of the light. Both in the Isle of Skye and the Isle of Egg, it's a rainbow breeding ground. It's a wet climate.
Is that where she went?
She went there primarily because it was a wild place and she wanted to get to really wild places. But she enjoyed the light there. It was different from the Mediterranean light, which is a very clear light, and she also enjoyed. But the Hebridean light is a mysterious one. I suppose it's a romantic one as well. And it does create a special luminosity from the water and the rainbows, which are often double rainbows there, even triple rainbows.
I used to see rainbows quite often. And if Winifred came down here and she saw rainbows, she said, maybe you could telephone me if you see a really superb rainbow. And I said, fine, well, yes, fine, you know. And I used to look up and see one over towards Scotland, amazed, and I thought, well, this is a good rainbow. So I'd ring Winifred up, and this particular day, someone answered the phone. I said, is Mrs. Nicholson there? Well, can I take a message? And it turned out to be a workman. And I said, will you tell Winifred there's a superb rainbow? So I felt a bit stupid, really, but he obviously passed the message on, because eventually there was a little note pushed under the door and said, thank you for telephoning me about the rainbows.
Did she want to see them just to sort of refresh her memory of rainbow, or to paint them?
She used to try and puzzle the colours. She used to look at the colours and say, what sort of red is it? What sort of orange is it? What sort of violet is it? She used to feel that a painting wasn't a painting unless one somewhere had a hint of violet. She felt that was the thing that gave the painting its lift. And she said it was the most difficult colour to use.
So she was looking at rainbows for sort of colour lessons?
Yes, and just the experience, just the innocence of looking and enjoying a rainbow. We all feel that. And then someone gave her a prism, or a friend gave her this prism, and she talked about being able to carry her rainbow machine in her pocket, and she could bring it out any time she wanted to see a rainbow.
In the 1950s, Winifred made excursions to the Hebrides, but then in the 60s, she also started making annual painting trips to Greece. Why was that?
I think she loved and had a great respect for the culture of Greece. I think she felt somehow it was very pure, and I remember her comparing it with what she felt when she went to North Africa and found that a little dark. Greece gave her a sense of light, both physically and spiritually. And I think the flowers in Greece she loved very much, because many of her Greek paintings have flowers in them. Copper and Capari shows 3 vases on a windowsill with a view of the hills of Mycenae beyond, and she must have done that looking out of the window of the hotel, and that expresses all the heat and warmth and brilliance of Greece, which suited her whole tenor as a painter.
Did she get excited over things she loved?
Oh, very much.
Though she didn't really like people watching her while she was painting, it destroyed her concentration. When she was painting in the south of France or Greece, where she painted outside, you would often get a little group of curious people standing round the back, watching her, and this was a bit off-putting, and she had an ingenious way of getting rid of them. She would turn round and gaze very pointedly at their feet. And then she would go back to her painting, and then she would turn round and gaze at their feet again. And after a while they would begin to shuffle their feet and feel very nervous, and would eventually go away.
The only painting holiday we did go on was to the Isle of Egg. Winifred had been there in the 1950s with Kathleen Raine, and she remembered the time they'd cooked on the fire and they'd had candlelight, and she hoped it wouldn't be too, as she said, civilised. So they came, and it's quite a long journey from here, Cumbria, up to the point where you catch the ferry across to Egg. And my wife took Winifred and Kate up in the car, and going up, she had to go up to the Bank's Head to load the car, and when she got there was these two enormous suitcases. I mean, enormous metal suitcases they used to drag around Greece when they used to go painting. They took volumes of books, I mean, hardbound books in case it was wet, paints, oil paints in tubes, box upon box of ranges of colours, and then portfolios full of canvases of different size, boards, cardboard, paper. I mean, they were going for a fortnight, we were only going for a week, but they would have bags of material that would keep them going probably for about 3 months. And Shirley, my wife, had to try and get these suitcases on the roof rack. But Winifred, who would be, 86 then, she took it all in a stride. And before she actually unpacked bags or did anything, she was looking out of windows and walking outside the cottage to see actually what there would be to paint. But as soon as the breakfast was over, Winifred sort of covered the table with newspaper, got her paints out, and she just organised herself very quietly, ignored what was going on in the room, and started to paint.
She painted a great many pictures in her lifetime. Every day, in a way, was a day lost when there wasn't a new painting. She didn't really paint for being exhibited in galleries or public places. In that, I think she's very different from Ben, who's very much a public painter. You feel that his great canvases look their best, in a way, in awful thing to say, directors' offices or banks or something, public places. But Winifred was a private painter. She wanted people to live with her paintings and receive the blessing from them that she had received from that happy hour when she painted them. That the story should tell itself to the person who lived with the painting in their own rooms, and she used to sell them for very, very little.
I think she was very generous. She came one day and she looked at my house and she said, "There's a space on that wall. It really should have a picture, And the next time she came, she brought a picture and put it up there. And several times I said, that picture's yours, and, it's been there so long now, I think it'd better stay.
Painting was at the very core of her being. And therefore a successful painting that she did meant a great deal. And she valued it, whether it was hers or anyone else's. One of the things I remember particularly about being with Winifred was the importance of being an artist.
There was this whole world of human life flowing round everything for Winifred, that in every painting, although people are not shown, it was the flow of life in her house that was the background of any painting. There's a very lovely one of some curtains, just pinned together, that the sky is beyond. It's a feeling of morning and of waking up. And this seems to me a very feminine thing, that you are waiting for the day and what it will bring, and for the curtains to be parted, and then the flow of life will begin in the house.
We used to have a lot of conversations about the way you had to manage your work with all the domestic responsibilities.
Did she give you practical advice about how to be a woman and an artist, or how she managed to be a mother and an artist, for example?
Well, she had one sentence which she said to me, which I think summed it all up, and I think it's something which I felt a complete response to. And she said, "You have to be ruthless, but only with yourself." And she explained that by saying that if you were somewhere where there was a motif or an idea, and you were feeling you'd really rather sit in the sun, you jolly well went to work, so that it was making the most of your opportunities, but fulfilling your duties and obligations to anyone who was there to be looked after.
In a sense, the art came out of all the other things. It came out of her not neglecting them, out of all the things she did for Cumberland and for local activities and people. Winifred took a great interest in the crafts that people were making, and supporting that and taking an interest in them, things like quilting and making rugs and
carvings and pottery, and she was able to move with the times because as the old Cumberland went, so a kind of new Cumberland came in of young artists, potters, weavers, whom Winifred encouraged immensely.
She was a great optimist, and she had a very great exuberance towards life. And always this wonderful thing about never being old. I mean, very much tackling each new day in a very wonderful fashion, which made living in the house very exciting because one was almost led to believe she was immortal, I suppose.
Would she value the opinion of another artist, such as yourself?
She wasn't sort of very pushy about her work, but she liked ideas, and I would say that she found not only talking about painting interesting, but certainly talking about other things also. She was very interested in new political ideas or new ideas of any sort, and she wasn't at all afraid of talking about any contemporary problems. She actually rather liked tackling them, which was sometimes quite unsettling for people who found talking to somebody in their 80s about premarital sex or something like that very disturbing. And she didn't find it disturbing at all. In fact, she found their discomfort somewhat amusing, I think.
She was a bit of a tease.
Yes, I think, yes, she was. And a great liberal, so she was always kind of trying to push people along that path of liberalism with a capital L. She rather liked the Liberal Party and I think the breadth of their ideas. So she was quite good at tackling socialists or conservatives alike and rather liked that way of stirring them up a bit.
But she had very strong views on teetotalism.
Yes, and on Christian Science, I suppose. But on the other hand, there were times certainly when she said to me, "Oh, sometimes I think some of these people who come to see me, we should perhaps get some drinks for them because they appear to be so jaded after a while that I think they need a bit of gin. But I've never bought any because I'm not quite sure what to buy."
She also very much liked colour television when it came along in her old age. She hired one from Carlisle, I remember, just to try it, but it stayed. She liked to have the colour a bit wrong, so that things were rather purple and striking colours.
So she'd actually alter the television a bit, would she?
Yes, she did. It always used to rather irritate me when I went up there because she had it tuned in the colour so that it was sparking sort of rainbow effects all the way around the picture. And it was sometimes rather green in colour as well. And I used to say to her, "Winifred, shall I tune that for you so that it comes clear?" "Oh, no, that's how I like it," she would say.
When she was an old lady, her face used to make us think of the face of a wonderful Viking. She had a tremendously strong face, very beautiful face, but it was like a sort of warrior who had battles in her life.
Were these battles reflected in her paintings? They got much darker towards the end of her life.
Well, of course, the interesting thing is that she had a grandson who started to talk to her about black. And she said, "I'm not going to exclude any one colour from my palette." And so black came into it a bit more, and she faced up to the challenge. Indeed, there is one picture here now, which is these rainbow colours coming out of the blackness. And the blackness is very important to the shining of the rainbow colours.
So what did the dark mean?
I think the dark meant depth. It's something mysterious and something a little bit unknown, but not an unhappy unknown.
Both she and indeed Ben had an exhibition planned when they did pass on, which opened within a month of their death. And in Winifred's case, there were these lovely rainbow pictures, which were all shown together in London, and I feel certain that they expressed the joy she was expressing, certain that she expressed verbally in those last years. She was prepared to go on painting here, but she was also prepared to go on to a new experience.